Now broadcasting to all attendees. So welcome all attendees. We will take just a couple of minutes to let everyone join. This is a new format for us and many of you, although we're all quickly becoming experts in Zoom, I know. So just sit tight and know that in a minute or two, we will start rolling. This is the Main Street 101 webinar, and we will start in just a couple minutes. Now's a great time to grab a glass of water. I see Brianne did that. So smart. Oh, very good. So I see we do have most of our attendees already with us, Brianne. There's like at least 2/3 of us already here. So very good. Everybody's being really, really punctual. Thank you for that. And we will make sure to keep this within 1 hour. So your time, I appreciate. And thanks for being here on time. We'll also end on time.
Yes, and with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm trying to figure out my slide advance. Pardon me for that. First, by way of introduction, Jonelle and I are your Washington Main Street team. I'm Brianne Durham. I'm the director of the program. And Jonelle is our still rather new, I guess, Main Street specialist. For those of you who have been part of our network for some time, you know, it's been a long time coming that we had the opportunity to hire a specialist to help provide services to your communities. And we just couldn't be more thrilled that Jonelle joined us on January 2nd, which feels like a lifetime ago. So
5 months in, but many more years. I've been in the same seat most of you are, because I've been a Main Street volunteer and committee and board member. So I'm definitely still fresh on the scene as a state coordinator, but I have some experience of my own that is probably close to what you're doing now.
And a great introduction, Jonelle. Definitely relevant to share that we both have local Main Street experience. I was an executive director myself in Lewiston, Idaho for 5 years before coming to work for the Washington Trust. So I think it's safe to say that Jonelle and I both love Main Street and are just very eager to serve and continue serving your communities. So turning it back over to Jonelle for why you're here today.
Yes, and we just wanted to recognize the fact that we do have several different audiences. You may be a brand new volunteer, you might be a board member, you might even be a new executive director. I think we had a few of those join us. So we are speaking toward what we all have in common, which is this desire to get grounded in the basics of the Main Street approach and some of the history and structure within Main Street in Washington. So what we hope you'll be able to leave with is that background in philosophy, information about the Washington Main Street Network, the principles and the points. We'll go into some detail on that, and then really how you can use this framework, because one of the things I really want to affirm to you all is Main Street is made for this. So whether it's recovery because you've had this downturn in your economy because maybe like several years ago, some of you might remember in rural places, the timber industry took a hit. Well, we're taking another kind of hit now, but Main Street has been there for all of that and continues to be a proven economic development method. So we're trying to ground us in this like philosophy and basics so that we can be nimble and really move forward with a method we know works.
Thank you so much for that. And we will be following up with this for those of you who are live. But next week, we're actually rolling out a recovery action plan for your communities to use if you should so choose. We did, though, feel like it was just really important to have a Main Street 101 opportunity prior to that, because the principles of Main Street are evergreen. And a lot of you have been living that for years now. So thank you for your service to your communities as volunteers and as staff. This is a refresher for some of you and new information for others, so we hope it can address that. Whether you've been in Main Street for quite some time or are brand new to it, I always think that sort of our origin story is a nice place to start. The Main Street movement, as it is, actually started in the late 70s when the National Trust for Historic Preservation identified what everybody in the country was seeing, which was that our economy was shifting. Malls were really taking a lot of retail away from our historic downtowns, and given that there is just so many historic assets in these downtown districts, and given the mission of the National Trust, they decided to see if there might be some tools or a framework that every community could use, since, so similar to what we're seeing right now, everybody was being affected in similar ways. And so they actually launched what they called at the time the Main Street Project. And they did sort of an interesting social or economic experiment in several different towns across the Midwest. They sent one of their staff people or a consultant to go and just kind of throw the spaghetti against the wall, try to figure out what works for a community and economic development in a historic downtown. And they sort of did this trial and error process a couple of times over in different states. And ultimately what they discovered is that every community and every commercial district is different, and that the unique assets of those places really need to be upheld in the work. They also found, frankly, that their experiment of sending somebody in from the outside is just not really the best way to do local economic development. It should be done as a grassroots effort, which was a really important thing for them to discover. And I'm sure all of you understand, 40 years later, how valuable that still continues to be with the work that you're doing. They also found that a comprehensive approach was really crucial. No one project was going to, quote unquote, solve all of the downtown's problems or save a community. It wasn't just about the streetscape. It wasn't just about a couple of events. And it wasn't even just about the businesses in the district. The idea that over a period of time, incrementally, a group of people coming together to address the moment, to address the current economic situation, and to provide movement toward a shared vision in this comprehensive way was really critical. And so out of all of that came the 8 principles and the 4 points that have turned into what we lovingly refer to as the Main Street approach. In Washington State, Main Street is actually housed in the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, but it's contracted out to the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation, which is a statewide nonprofit that Jonelle and I both work for. And so from its origin, back in the late 70s and early 80s, it has turned into quite the movement. Almost every state has a program like ours, though they're housed in different agencies or nonprofits. Ours was started in 1984, shortly after the National Main Street Center was started out of the National Trust. DAP, the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, picked up the program in 2010, and that's the year that we started managing it here at the Washington Trust in partnership with them as well. As any good movement, if you feel that you can use that word, which we certainly do, it has grown incredibly over the last 40 years, both nationally and in Washington State. Over 2,000 communities across the nation have used the Main Street approach. And in Washington State, we're really pleased to work with 65 designated communities or affiliates, which everybody on the live call today is very likely representing one of those. And so, and here, I'm sorry about that. There's a visual representation of the communities and affiliates that are part of the Washington State Main Street program.
And so in all of these 65 communities and affiliates, we hope that you have already started using the guiding principles that you see here before you. We will dive into this a little bit more, but I really wanted to just have a slide that laid it all out there very flatly. These 8 principles are not mandates necessarily. They're a framework that you can interpret and use as best works for you. So one of the things that makes Main Street this stretchy and growing and adaptive kind of approach is the fact that you start with these principles and they can inform your work, but they can look very different community to community because, of course, each town and city is unique and has unique challenges. We would never want to put forth something that was so prescriptive that it became cumbersome or difficult for you to use. A couple of the ones I would really like to call out as being especially important right now are incremental, action-oriented, and asset-based. I think it was last week, or maybe even this week, time is passing very quickly for me, Governor Inslee was saying that our business districts need to be innovative and iterative, and Main Street is truly an approach that encompasses those. So when Brianna is talking about this is a comprehensive method, it says we're not just going to look at one segment or one sector of our downtown or historic district. We're going to look at the whole of everything and see how everyone is impacted and can help one another. We're going to look at the assets that we have and can build from, and we're going to embrace the fact that we probably need to be adaptive and make change. Now, building off of those 8 principles, we have 4 points. So you can incorporate those principles into the work that you do, and the work that you do is probably going to be housed in one of these 4 points that take the shape of committees or teams. So we have outreach, economic vitality, design, and promotion. And we're going to dive into each of these, so I won't spend too much time, but Brianne has a really lovely way of encapsulating each of these with the leveraging an engaged public, leveraging entrepreneurs, leveraging the built environment, and leveraging place and cultural history. So I just wanted to sit this up there so you can see all 4 of them at once. And the next thing we're going to do is dive into each of these points and discuss them further.
I think just tying back to what Janelle said about it being asset-based, all of these things that you're leveraging here are your unique local assets. The Main Street approach is providing you with a framework and with a support system for making that work in your own local community. So first up, they're not alphabetical, obviously. We do want to talk about the outreach point. A lot of you maybe refer to this as organization. We are going a little bit rogue in Washington State and trying to rename this outreach, because I really feel like that is a little bit more appropriate in terms of how we think about this committee, in part how it's different from the board, because a really common misconception is that the organization point is just the board's job. And we just really want to reiterate and elevate the work of a board of directors and separate it from what your outreach team will be working on. So what we hope your outreach committee takes on is really taking the lead on that resource and partnership development as Main Street ambassadors. Remember that you're focused on leveraging that engaged public. And so some of the types of activities that you might take on with your outreach team, again, based off of what your own local organization and community need, are fundraising initiatives. And so a quick note on this, the board is responsible for the financial health of the organization, but it may very well ask the outreach committee to work on some specific fundraising initiatives. So that's a little nuance to the difference between board and outreach in terms of the finances of the organization. Volunteer engagement is a huge piece of outreach. And one of the reasons I feel so strongly that a successful Main Street program does need to have its own outreach committee or team. Volunteers make a Main Street program run. Those of you who already do have executive directors, if your Main Street communities are building toward that, you know that staff person has a lot on their plate, and really they're the conductor of your organization or your orchestra. And so having a group of people who is focused on bringing in volunteers, but also keeping them involved and showing them appreciation and making sure that they're in the right spot so that they're really truly engaged is something that you really do need a team of people to help with. One of the Main Street communities that I think does this extremely well is Ellensburg. They have upcoming an appreciation celebration that they're hosting in June. It's an annual event where volunteers are recognized, and they give out awards. They're based off of community nominations. They are holding it virtually this year, but it's just one of the many ways that the Ellensburg Downtown Association is really strong and intentional in their volunteer engagement. They also have what I think is a really great term and program, their Superstar nomination program, which they title as a program to shine a light on those who bring life, love, and vibrancy to their downtown. And that is an outreach or organization team initiative to recognize, again, the people, the public that make their organization work. And really tied to that is communication. Another nuance that I think is worth mentioning is the difference between outreach and promotions. And I would really just say outreach is focused on your mission and your people and sharing the vision for what you're doing downtown. Whereas promotions, you may be doing a lot of communication there too, but it's focused more on marketing the district itself. So communication in the form of newsletters, sharing information, but let's also not forget how important listening is to communication. And so one of the great trends I'm seeing right now in our state is that Main Street programs through their outreach teams are conducting listening tours to actually gather opinions, feedback from businesses and other stakeholders in the district, certainly in coordination with other committees. And this is something that in this moment in time is also really important. I know that a couple of our communities are doing this virtually right now through things like coffee chats. And so between fundraising, volunteer engagement, and communication, there is just a lot of work for an outreach team to take on. So one of the things that Janelle has incorporated in this webinar is a slide for each of the points about who are the people that might very likely be part of this initiative. And so for outreach, the question we pose is, who knows how to set goals and inspire folks? Who connects well? Those are the types of people you can be thinking about as you're searching out leaders for your outreach team. So those might be people who have experience with fundraising, specific experience, either through work or other volunteer opportunities, with managing volunteers and recognizing them. It is truly an art form in and of itself. Don't overlook civic group leaders, as well as folks from local lending institutions that they may very well have a directive or the allowance to use some of their time to help with community programs like yours.
And I will just add, as Brianne was talking, it really struck me that in outreach, the folks you want on your team or committee are folks who have access to capital, whether that's social capital or financial capital. You want those folks on your team. And speaking of capital, this is one of the ones that often might come up, economic vitality. So your EV committee or team, they're really charged with taking a look at the business mix downtown, taking a look at how you can build that out, either through attraction, retention, or expansion. And I think one of the introductory sort of things you could do if you have a fairly new organization or building up your economic vitality team is just to go to your downtown, do a loop around, and take stock of your storefronts and your buildings. Really truly get like a map of your downtown district, go for a walking tour or a driving tour if you need to be socially distant, and know who has open and vacant storefronts, because those are your opportunities for attracting folks to take them, and who has really good thriving businesses that you can look to and highlight and say, here's someone who is obviously doing something right. Let's shine a spotlight on them and get to know them. So that infrastructure reuse piece can be looking at what buildings or vacancies could be opportunities for growth in our economic system in the Main Street. So looking to entice people or attract people, often one of the first things you want to do is look at entrepreneurs in your own community. Who are those folks who have like a side hustle, who have something building in their garage that they're doing as a service or a product that you think, this could really be something that enhances our mix downtown. And you can entice them in a variety of ways, one of the ones that I have loved seeing is in Colfax. So for those of you who haven't been, Colfax is on the east side where I am, and it's a gem of a town not that far away from Pullman, where WSU is. So now that you've got it in your mind, you can picture going downtown, and one of their buildings they have turned into a business incubator. They call it the Colfax Mercantile. And what they've done is they've worked with other economic vitality and economic development folks, so the county and their ADO, and actually built out this space to host many different entrepreneurs who are just starting to launch their business. So there are actually different stalls. They host a variety of entrepreneurs in a single space. And what that provides is an on-ramp for these folks who have an idea and they want to test it out without fully leaping into all of the costs of a storefront when they're the sole owner and proprietor. I really also think incentivizing development and just saying like, hey, here is a idea for your vacant storefront. Let's hold a pop-up, and maybe you offer some low rent because if things go well, you might have a new tenant who has a great idea, but they were a little nervous about jumping into a lease, not knowing if their idea was good. So a pop-up event is something we're seeing in a lot of our Main Street communities. And then really, how are you doing with these different things that you're trying? Tracking that progress is something you can turn around and provide to your city government, to your county government, to other folks and say, look, we're building up the economy. We're actually making something here. We're creating new jobs. We're creating new capital through taxes. And those are also going to be incredibly important as we prove our purpose and our position and value in the days to come. So who do you want on your team? To do all of this excellent work, you're definitely going to want to look at potential partners who are really good at being innovative or adapting to change, so your entrepreneurs. You really want to look at who is already an anchor and holding down your downtown. So startup and legacy owners, I really think you got to have those folks on your team because they provide both that perspective of what it means to be and hold an anchor store in a downtown over time, maybe even through generations, and also a new perspective of change and adaptation and trying and failing fast and failing forward and then moving on to the next idea. So you can have both of those different perspectives represented if you involve both entrepreneurs and legacy owners. And then of course you're going to want to look at who else is on this same economic vitality team. Those are often your developers locally or your SBA or your SBDC if you're lucky enough to have an office like that nearby. But don't discount other folks who are just into buildings, like your real estate agents. There are folks who want to make sure that every building is being used, so invite them to the table too. And don't be surprised that folks get excited about this. I mean, it's challenging work, but it can also be very engaging work. And sometimes just having more open conversations about how you're trying to build up your downtown economy can really get people excited. And then you'll find someone who you never would have guessed. Like maybe they're just a professor at WSU, but they're near enough to Colfax that they want to help out and get involved in the mercantile. Or maybe you have someone downtown who is just quietly running their own shop, isn't necessarily that new entrepreneur or legacy owner, but they care a lot about providing quality service to people, and you invite them to that EV committee or team because they can help provide a model to other new business owners and be a mentor. So you're going to find all sorts of folks, but these are a few you can start with as you're building your team.
Another important thing we want to make sure we say about who can and should be part of the different committees is that this is not prescriptive either. These are some ideas to help you start thinking if you are building or building back up a committee based off of the fact that you want Main Street committees to be skilled. But that can look like a lot of different things. For instance, as we move into design, an architect is a very logical choice for a design committee. And I know one of my very best volunteers in Lewiston was an architect on my design committee. But don't forget that sometimes, a banker, for instance, might not want to be on economic vitality. They might have a passion for art walks. So as you look at the people who want to get involved and try to make those invitations, look at skills, but also look at the person, have a one-on-one conversation, and see where their interests are. Because I think we all just know intuitively that somebody's going to stay involved and have that heart for the work as a volunteer the most if it is really getting at their unique interests. So with design, this committee is taking the lead on developing the built environment assets, making downtown that welcoming, engaging space that is so unique to the environments we're working in. So showcasing heritage and culture is certainly part of design. Though one of the things we like to say about Main Street is that it is economic development rooted in historic preservation. And I mention this here to say preservation is not just the job of the design committee, it is the context we're all working in. But certainly this point can be very focused on it in terms of educating and advising building owners, providing them with resources and ideas, and incentivizing them. They're also dealing with the built environment in terms of streets and sidewalks and roads and circulation and transportation. So there's a lot that really goes into leveraging the built environment. But to sort of like help you wrap your mind around what this might look like in terms of preservation assets and historic assets, a really good place to start is sort of like what Joanna was saying with economic vitality and wrapping your head around what those entrepreneurial and business assets are, mapping out, doing an informal survey of the historic assets in your downtown buildings, where they are, year, owner. That's really important as sort of baseline information to have and can be updated from time to time. And that's rather at the beginning and along those updating lines. But what that focus on your building inventory can look like at a more advanced stage. I always think about what Wenatchee has been up to. They had so much energy around historic building redevelopment over the last couple of years, more than our resources at DAC could even keep up with in terms of advising building owners, that Wenatchee actually, through a partnership with their city, hired a private preservation consultant to work hand in hand with 11 different projects in their downtown to make sure that all of those building owners were able to tap into the very many different types of resources, from federal historic tax credits to state valuation, and really just had that hand-holding along the way to make sure that their investment in those historic buildings was going to pay off. In terms of the public right-of-way, figuring out uses and really approaching design in terms of tactical urbanism is something that your team might work on as well. At this moment in time, there are a lot of examples of that with our Main Street programs, working with their cities to allow for different uses to make business work during closure, such as SELA, where they're allowing restaurants to space out tables in parking lots so that they can have the number of people served at a time to make their business pencil out. Similarly, Vancouver is working on parklets in parking spaces so that they can extend their outdoor seating area similarly. So being creative and working with your public partners on solutions, even when we're not in sort of crisis mode as we are right now, adapting downtown to fit needs and to have that vitality and that energy by using spaces that people want to be in anyway, because people are drawn to historic downtowns. I wager that every single person on this webinar right now and watching it later on are naturally drawn to a historic downtown. And so figuring out ways to capitalize on that and also just use spaces creatively is certainly part of what we encourage you to think about with your design team. So who should be on that team? People who love beautifying their storefront. Certainly architects and designers. It's great to have that city involvement on a design committee as too. whether that be on the planning side of things, Parks and Rec, maybe both of them, Public Works, artists and art-related businesses, and then certainly we want to have property owner perspective in the mix as well. And again, just remembering that there may very well be people who kind of come out of the woodwork because they have a secret passion for preservation or for creative uses of sidewalks or for street trees. I mean, people may very well be coming to you because they think, ooh, this might be my opportunity to make my mark on my town.
All right, so promotions has a very special place in my heart because I was lucky enough to both serve as a volunteer and later a chair on my promotions committee. So when I think of promotions, I'll also first harken back to the difference you should draw between promotions and the work that they do to really develop the brand of the whole of downtown, and outreach or organization teams and the work that they do promoting just the Main Street organization. So when you're thinking about promotions work, you really want to think and center it around the whole of downtown and your community. So what is your town known for? What's the history and the culture and the story of your town? So really identifying those key and unique assets that your downtown has. I mean, like Chelan is also Lake Chelan. Like that's a whole thing Chelan has going for it, right? They're not going to ignore the fact that not only do they have this historic downtown, but that historic downtown leads very nicely and conveniently to a beautiful lake. And Wenatchee knows that people know them for their apples, and Walla Walla, we certainly celebrate our onions over here. And these are just things that we know are part of our history, but we can incorporate that into our brand. One of the things I just recently saw was someone incorporating historically hip into their branding for their downtown, which I thought was very fun because it highlighted both the fact that they are a historic downtown, but that they have this new interest in bringing in the young and the entrepreneurial. So you can build in both of those. I want to make sure you don't feel afraid to both hold up where you have been and at the same time reach for where you're going with your downtown. To do that, not only do you want to identify the unique assets that you already have in your downtown, be those cultural or physical, you want to look at the consumer trends in your area and in nearby areas, because one of the things you might want to think about and even partner with on your EV team is how you can attract entrepreneurs, or how you could attract folks who are doing well in a neighboring committee to open up a second shop in your downtown. So defining your downtown's market niche will really aid you in presenting your case to some of those folks you might be hoping to attract, or hoping to invite to expand into your downtown if they have an existing storefront somewhere else. And then pinpointing and promoting that brand is definitely the backbone of the work. I think back to my time on the promotions committee, and I want to recognize the fact that a lot of promotions does involve events, and that is super because that brings folks downtown. But I think you don't want to lose sight of the fact that you can have a great downtown event and be involving the locals that you already have, and be thinking of how you can promote that out to folks all around the region. I think of Centralia, and they have this amazing lighted tractor parade that they have as this hometown, like, we invite all of our surrounding farmers and ag folks in with their tractors or their big semis, and they're decked out with thousands upon thousands of Christmas lights. And those folks who live there, they're making holiday memories. At the same time, they work with other partners, and they bring in people from Portland to Seattle. And that is done partly because they're not only thinking locally, they're thinking regionally, and they're reaching out and getting into some of the magazines that circulate, and they're pulling in all of these folks that then spend money in their downtown, which that's exactly what you want to do. You want to celebrate what you have that's local and unique, and you want to promote that outward so that other folks get excited and want to come and experience and visit your downtown. And then I want to say, if you have folks who are very good historians, you might want to involve them in your promotions committee, because they could do really exciting and fun things like, in the photo here, Gig Harbor has walking tours, and they actually tour folks around their historic waterfront, and they talk about what their community is known for, what the history of their community is, what's special and unique about them. So I love this photo, and I love this idea because it promotes and involves people in the history and the story of the place. And that's one of the things that is so important to Main Street, is celebrating your place and your unique history. So don't forget, historians or folks who know the local history, you might want to tap one of them to be on your promotions committee. But especially, you'll also want to involve folks who own businesses downtown. You'll want to have folks from local media outlets. So even really small towns, even, you know, like Dayton, which is my neighbor over here, they have their own local paper. So you can involve them, you can get them on your table so they know first thing, and they can help spread that word. Folks who are really good at social media, that's becoming more and more important. Folks who are involved in signage, that's usually something that you want to have access to. And then chamber or tourism staff. And I want to just acknowledge the fact that we had a question around how can you find some of these partners? Well, one of the first things I might suggest is consider who else is an existing agency that has a sort of similar mission statement. So with Main Street, chambers often are also serving businesses. And if you can, go right up to them and say, we have similar missions. How can we help each other out? I want to involve you. Come be on my promotions committee. Come be on, you know, come be a part of this. Tourism staff, the same. I mean, we have sort of a statewide tourism alliance, but we often have locals. So here in Walla Walla, where I am, we have Discover Walla Walla and Visit Walla Walla. These folks are doing a very similar kind of promotion, and they're also linked into some of those regional networks that you want to promote too, to bring other folks into your downtown. So really working with your partners, that can be key. And again, you never know, right? Who might show up and be on your promotions? It might be the business owner who just happens to be super good at social media and has a big following and can help push things out. You know, the question we have here is, who do you hear all the good news from? Who tells you about the fun or exciting events that are happening that you want to go to? You might want to have that person on your committee.
Yeah, I'll just add to that question about where do you find these people. In a lot of ways, as Janelle was saying, my approach as a local director was at least two-pronged. One was that I was always on the hunt, and I asked my board members to be on the hunt as well. And I realize hunt is maybe an aggressive word, but that's what it felt like. You know, I would go to community events or just meet people at the coffee shop, which was my third place, where I did a lot of my work. And I would always be sort of looking to see people who maybe mentioned to me that they had a real interest in our downtown. And I would invite them to have a one-on-one conversation. And I obviously was asking them to volunteer, but it was also just a chance to build relationships and share what we were working on. So there's that more proactive person-to-person approach, which is really just a mindset for you and board members and other volunteers always to be on the hunt. But then also just making sure you have sort of the tools in place so that people can come out of the woodwork and actually find you. A lot of our Main Street communities have very good portals on their website where you can sign up or learn about being a volunteer. I will again give a shout out to Ellensburg here, because they have a very clear section of their website that says we're looking for you, basically. Here are different opportunities that you have, from long-term volunteering to short-term opportunities, which I will also say is a really important mix to have, because sometimes people will come to you and not quite be ready to jump on a committee, because that doesn't always sound like fun. But if you can capture them for a one-off event or even like a beautification project, that there's volunteer development and leadership development that happens there, which we'll talk about later. So making sure you have things in place, both from in-person opportunities, you know, boothing where you have time and it feels appropriate at your own events in particular, so that people can say, oh, I now understand who put on this event. I love this event. I'm going to give them my contact information and maybe get involved. So in person and opportunities on your website for people to learn about, so that you can capture those out of the woodwork folks that you might not naturally directly ask to participate.
And I will say that I think we'll have time to answer a few questions at the end, but first we want to go through a bit of a wrap up and just orient you to how you can use this approach. So now we've kind of talked about the history of Main Street in Washington, why this works, because it is adaptive, because it can grow with you, because it provides you with a framework, but it doesn't tell you you must do this or you must do that. You get to decide what pieces are going to serve you. And those 8 principles, those are going to be things you can come back to and say, okay, we're doing this work. What do we need to remember? Oh, we need to remember to be incremental. Not everything is going to happen all at once, but small progress is just as important as those big leaps and bounds. I think folks, almost everybody I've talked to now knows that example of the like success iceberg. You see success and it's like this shining little peak, but underneath the water is this huge amount of unseen work. And all of that is progress, even if it happens behind the scenes. And that can be informed by those 8 principles. The 4 points, we're talking about your own organization or outreach. So remembering to tell your story and let folks know that Main Street is involved and is assisting your downtown in recovery and revitalization work. The fact that you have an economic vitality team, so someone who is already specializing in this and can be a partner to other folks who are interested in the same thing. The folks who are in design and can help really create this welcoming environment to encourage folks to come and visit, help find their way with different signage if they're new visitors, and can help promote local history through beautiful murals and all of these other kinds of pieces. And then of course the folks who are in your promotion who just talk about how great your downtown is to anyone who will listen. And all of this is a part of the Main Street approach, which is a time-tested strategy for preservation-based, asset-based economic development. So it's an approach that says, you have great things in your downtown, let's build off of them. And Brianne's gonna tell us a little bit more about how those principles work in actually the doing.
Right, so in terms of it being comprehensive, you know, John L., I think, has shown a very good light on it being asset-based. It's also incremental. If you are on sort of the startup timeline right now, you're probably really feeling that you're spending a lot of your time explaining to people what it is you want to do and inviting them to be part of it. And you'll find that changing attitudes around, first of all, your downtown, second of all, the value of your organization is a big part of your work. Depending on the state of your downtown right now and the state of your organization, you may very well find that you're really just trying to sell people on the fact that your downtown is worth any amount of energy or effort. I know that was my personal experience, but over a period of time, especially as you start to build some momentum, which I promise you will happen, those attitudes will start to change. And a big part of that is focusing on one of those principles, which is quality. Everything you do as a Main Street program needs to be based on quality, because that's part of what you're trying to communicate to the general public, is that your downtown is valuable. It is a place for quality businesses. It is a place for quality interactions, for quality design. And so you need to reflect that as a Main Street program through your projects, your communication. Really, it's so connected to that value proposition for your downtown and for your organization. And then also, you know, a big part of change over time is seeing things happen. People are hungry for it if you are at that early stage. And that doesn't mean you have to take on everything all at once, because remember, you're trying to balance it with quality, not necessarily quantity, but choosing strategic initiatives that are both long-term, because that long-term vision and working toward those big goals is so important, but peppering in some projects that get the community to realize things are happening, which is so crucial to building momentum. And just realizing that your message is constantly, this is worth it, here's what we're doing, here's what we want to do, is really important, I believe. And one thing that I heard sometimes in our first few years in Lewiston was, well, how long does your Main Street project last? And that's, part of that communication piece that you're doing, especially early on, explaining that it's comprehensive and incremental, that it's not a project, that the economy is always going to be changing, as we well know. And so Main Street's work in keeping downtown vital is always, always, always relevant. The engagement piece, which we've touched on several times already, is also another big thing we really want you to hold on to as you're making things happen in your community. As I mentioned with the story, this sort of origin story, a big Main Street principle is that this is locally driven. We are here for you, and there's a whole network, as I'll discuss in just a second, of Main Streets from around the nation that sort of, have your back and want to support you, but the work happens locally. So you and your fellow citizens are making this happen, and partnerships are key, and then focusing on the people. Main Street matters because of the people, and there is leadership in your community. Some of it you might be building up, some of it is there and ready and just so eager to be part of what you're doing. But just think about the people you're inviting into your organization as every one of them being a potential leader. Jonelle herself is a great example of that. She got involved at a very, baseline level because of some interest and knowledge about the organization. And because there were people in place in that community who saw her potential, she became a committee chair, and boom, a couple years later, she is your Main Street specialist for Washington. So that example obviously won't apply to everybody, but I had a lot of experiences personally where somebody got involved because of a flower planting event or something that might seem like a one-off. But if you're looking for them and they do have that interest, you can build up leaders within your organization. And then, communication is key. This is why we're here. This is what we're doing. This is how you can be involved, are all part of that really critical lens of engagement for our Main Street program. And then lastly, and you may be noticing that we've built in those 8 principles throughout, but we also want to say that Main Street works because, as Jonelle said, it's tried and true. It's a 40-year-old program that's been implemented in every state across the nation and in 2,000 plus communities. So we know that it works, but almost more importantly, you're not alone. There is National Main Street Center, and we'll have a link for you on the last slide to access some of their resources. So you have that national support system, best practices, webinars, trainings. It's really, really valuable. And I will say that they are also really working hard to think about what Main Street Forward, as they're calling it, looks like right now, and helping local communities have resources to start addressing economic recovery. Similarly, our state program, as we shared in that map, is a network. At its best, it is a network. You have Jonelle and I certainly as support, but I know that I think all of our Main Street communities who interact with each other pretty often will say that peer-to-peer connection and the sharing of ideas is a big part of why they're part of this, why they're part of Washington Main Street. And so with all of those supports in place, and with this framework that is the Main Street approach, and just using it kind of as your guiding light, comprehensive in these 4 areas, moving things forward, keeping people involved. That's your guide for using this locally. And one of the big questions that comes up often is, what is the structure of a Main Street organization? So what I'm about to share is a best practice for how to structure a Main Street program. So at the Main Street community designation level, all Main Streets are nonprofit organizations. Affiliates may be at different stages. So we're looking at it through the lens of a Main Street community, but I will say nationally, this is also a best practice. So in terms of leadership, you have board of directors and an executive director, and perhaps support staff as well. The board is really focused on and responsible for policy and governance. They're responsible for the fiscal health of an organization and for helping to set the community vision and the strategy, which we'll talk more about in a second. The executive director is also involved in that strategy setting and really being that kind of inspirational leader that brings people together. They're also a manager in the sense that they're managing the organization's resources, both budget and the human resources, kind of being that conductor, like I said earlier, and trying to keep everybody who's involved in the organization sort of armed with the tools that they need at that committee level to make actions happen. And along those lines, coordinating the work. We really don't want executive directors or staff to be doing all of the work. Volunteers on the committees, getting those action plans accomplished is really important. But certainly the executive director and staff are really crucial as well. So we mentioned setting a strategy, and I want to just share with you visually what we think that looks like in terms of the 4-point approach, all sort of aiming at the same goal. And if you're like me, the visual is important for understanding what that means. So at the board and executive director level, we really encourage you to get the community's input. And I'll say this is crucial throughout the process, but really understand what is our community's vision for our town, and how does downtown align with that, and balancing that with the market realities. What are our economic assets here? What can we capitalize on? Where are there opportunities? And really blending the vision and the data piece together so that you can create a vision and a strategy, an overarching strategy for your district. And those big picture goals, I'll say, are really important so that all 4 of your committees are working together as opposed to in silos. This is a sort of a big reteaching, I guess, of Main Street over the last 5 years, just to make sure that everybody who's using this approach does understand that setting and having that overarching strategy or strategies so that the work of design is helping to leverage the work of economic vitality and promotions, and everybody is working on the same page so that momentum you build is stronger. The volunteers on those committees, again, we'll just encourage you to keep volunteer engagement front of mind. They are working together to accomplish work plan goals in coordination with the staff and the board. And one thing I just really want to say along the lines of volunteer leadership is that absolutely recommend that every one of your committees have a committee chairperson who's not the executive director, so that they can be really working with their fellow volunteers on accomplishing work plan goals, and so that not too much of that falls onto staff. And then throughout the process, again, thinking about the fact that this is not a project, Main Street is ongoing work. We really encourage you to measure your success along the way. So you set some goals, did you achieve them? How far were you? Assess what are those market realities? How is our district changing? How do we need to, sorry to use the word pivot, every few years, that's a process that the board and executive director should be taking on, celebrating your success, because you're going to have a lot of them. And there's so much work to do, but it is really important that you make a point of celebrating, both publicly and as an organization, so that you do have that personal momentum to see everything that you're accomplishing, and how it is building together to create the kind of community that you want to see, and then evolving along the way, and sort of restarting this process every few years, not with new people, but with sort of that input and realities, and making sure that the vision and strategies that you set are still relevant. And then, as I mentioned, community involvement and leadership development, in my opinion, don't fit in any one place in an organizational structure for a Main Street program. They are part of the entire thing. So at every point in the work planning process, and as you're bringing people into the organization, thinking about how's the community involved in this piece? How can they be? How should they be? And where are those leadership opportunities for people? So that, as that board of directors that maybe gets things established in the beginning, they put a ton of work into that. You're always looking for who are those next great board leaders going to be, so that, as I'm saying, we don't want to put too much on the plate of the executive director, but the same can be said of board members too. So really finding the leaders in your community and that constant rebuilding of your structure.
Awesome. I want to appreciate everyone who has been on this webinar with us and recognize some great questions that we have had come in and have been answered. So I want to quickly touch on the fact that if you're looking for other partners, never be afraid to check with websites for state institutions, or just consider who has similar mission statements, so other agencies already existing in your community. If you have a resource and you'd like to share it with the whole of the Main Street Network, please reach out to Brianne and I. Here are our contact emails. You can email either of us. If you are an affiliate, I am your best point of contact. If you're a designated community, Brianne is your best point of contact. We had a question about transformation strategies, and that is something that Main Street America has a cheat sheet for on their website. So their website's down at the bottom. You can find out more information about those. We don't have time to go into them in this 101, but I appreciate the question, because that means you're already thinking next level.
And I will just interject and say the structure that we just shared is modeled completely after their transformation strategy recommendations.
Absolutely. So if you have questions about that, or you're ready to take the next step because you've already read everything online, reach out to Brianne or I, and we can help move you to that next place. But I want to invite you to also check WashingtonNonprofits.org, especially if you have any financial or board or sort of nonprofit best practice kind of queries. They have a huge wealth of information on Washington nonprofits. We recommend them a lot. And then, of course, again, we want you to reach out to us. We're here to try and make Main Street better with all of you.
Thank you for your eagerness to participate today. This is just sort of a dream job to be able to serve all of you. So as Jonelle said, don't hesitate to reach out. And you'll be hearing quite a bit more from us soon about additional resources, including a major overhaul of our handbook, which I know a lot of you have already used over the years. So you have our contact information, and this webinar is being recorded in case you have fellow local leaders who would like to view it later. So thank you, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for your time, all. We'll talk again soon.